I want to start by talking about something that transformed my entire existence: your attitude. Let me be clear, I'm not talking about that surface-level, positive thinking that gets tossed around in motivational quotes. I'm talking about the fundamental lens through which you view everything in your life. I spent years blaming circumstances, other people, the economy, you name it. My breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I lost a major client and my car broke down on the same day. Sitting in that repair shop, watching my bank account dwindle, I realized something profound. My circumstances weren't unique, but my response to them was entirely my choice. What I discovered was that attitude isn't about ignoring reality. It's about how you position yourself within that reality. Think about two people facing identical challenges. One sees insurmountable obstacles, while the other sees valuable lessons and opportunities for growth. Their external circumstances are identical, but their internal landscapes couldn't be more different. I started a simple practice that day in the repair shop. Each morning, I began asking myself, what's one thing within my control today? Sometimes it was as basic as my response to difficult people, or as significant as tackling a project I'd been avoiding. This one question shifted my focus from what was happening to me to what I could do about it. The most powerful aspect of attitude work is that it creates a foundation for everything else. Without addressing this first, no amount of skill building or strategy development will stick. Your attitude is like the soil in which all other personal development efforts grow. I've watched people with tremendous talent and opportunity sabotage themselves with poor attitudes, while others with far fewer advantages thrive because they approach life with openness, resilience, and ownership. The good news, your attitude is entirely within your control. It requires daily maintenance, yes, but unlike many circumstances in your life, you have complete authority over how you choose to view the world. This is where your journey must begin. The second element you must work on immediately is your communication. I used to believe that being articulate or having a large vocabulary was what made someone a good communicator. I was wrong. True communication, the kind that builds relationships, resolves conflicts, and creates opportunities, is about much more than words. It's about developing the capacity to express yourself clearly while genuinely understanding others. I remember sitting across from my partner during what had become our third major argument of the week. We were saying plenty of words, but nothing was being heard. That night became a turning point when I finally asked, "Can you help me understand what you're actually experiencing right now?" Instead of preparing my next point, I truly listened. What transformed my relationships wasn't learning to speak more persuasively, but learning to listen more completely. Most people listen with the intent to respond, rather than the intent to understand. This subtle difference changes everything. I started practicing what I call empty cup listening, approaching conversations as if my mind were an empty cup ready to be filled with the other person's perspective, rather than a cup already full of my own thoughts and judgments. This doesn't mean abandoning your viewpoint, but temporarily setting it aside to create space for genuine understanding. The impact was immediate. People who had previously been defensive began opening up. Conflicts that once lasted days resolved in minutes, and my professional relationships developed a depth I hadn't thought possible. Communication isn't just about personal relationships, though. It's about how you present your ideas to the world and how you interpret what comes back. I've watched brilliant people with world-changing ideas remain unheard because they couldn't communicate those ideas effectively. Clear communication requires courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to say difficult things respectfully, and sometimes to simply say, "I don't know," or "I was wrong." When I started embracing this more authentic form of communication, I found that my words carried more weight, not because I had become more eloquent, but because they now carried the power of genuine connection. If you want to transform any area of your life, start by transforming how you communicate about it. Let's talk about something that sounds boring, but is actually revolutionary: self-discipline. For years, I mistakenly believed discipline was about forcing myself to do things I hated. I would create elaborate productivity systems only to abandon them within weeks. The breakthrough came when I realized that true discipline isn't about punishment or restriction. It's about freedom through structure. I remember the turning point vividly. I had committed to writing daily for 30 minutes, but 3 weeks in, I found myself staring at a blank screen, completely unmotivated. Instead of abandoning the commitment, I reduced it to just 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes turned into 15, then 30, not because I was forcing myself, but because the simple act of showing up consistently had created momentum. What I've learned is that self-discipline is like a muscle that strengthens with use, but atrophies with neglect. The key is starting small enough that you can be consistent. I began with tiny daily habits: making my bed immediately upon waking, drinking a full glass of water before my morning coffee, reading 3 pages of a book before looking at my phone. These seemingly insignificant actions created a foundation of reliability with myself. Each completed commitment, no matter how small, was a vote for my new identity as someone who does what they say they'll do. Over time, these small wins compound into something remarkable: self-trust. When you make a commitment to yourself and keep it repeatedly, you develop an unshakable confidence in your ability to follow through. The most powerful aspect of self-discipline isn't the external results it creates, though those are significant. It's the internal shift, knowing that you can rely on yourself even when motivation fades or circumstances change. This self-trust becomes a quiet source of strength in every area of your life. I've watched people transform their health, finances, relationships, and careers not through dramatic overhauls, but through small, consistent actions, taken day after day. Discipline creates the boundaries within which creativity and fulfillment can flourish. If you feel stuck or overwhelmed in any area of your life, start by establishing one small, non-negotiable daily practice. Your future self will thank you for the foundation you're building today. The 4th area you must address immediately is your limiting beliefs. These are the invisible boundaries you've drawn around what's possible for you. I spent years convinced that financial stability wasn't possible for someone with my background and education. This wasn't a conscious thought. It operated beneath my awareness, subtly influencing every financial decision I made. The revelation came during a conversation with my mentor, who asked a simple question: "Where's your evidence for that belief?" I started listing reasons, but as I heard myself speak, I realized my evidence was nothing more than recycled stories, most of which weren't even my own. This was the moment I understood how powerfully our unexamined beliefs shape our reality. Challenging your limiting beliefs begins with identifying them, which is harder than it sounds because we don't experience them as beliefs. We experience them as truth. Start by examining areas of your life where you feel stuck, or where you've said, "I can't," or "that's impossible for me." Behind these statements lie beliefs waiting to be questioned. I developed a practice I call belief auditing, where I regularly ask myself, what would have to be true for this situation to change? This question bypasses my initial resistance and opens my mind to possibilities I hadn't considered. When I applied this to my financial situation, I discovered beliefs about money being scarce, success requiring struggle, and wealth being somehow morally questionable. Once identified, these beliefs lost much of their power. The most liberating aspect of this work is realizing that beliefs are not facts. They're learned interpretations that can be unlearned and replaced. When I began deliberately replacing limiting beliefs with empowering alternatives, I wasn't engaging in empty positive thinking. I was actively restructuring my mental framework to align with the reality I wanted to create. This is a continuous process, not a one-time fix. Our minds naturally revert to familiar patterns, which is why regular examination of your beliefs must become a practice. The question isn't whether you have limiting beliefs, we all do, but whether you're willing to bring them into the light where they can be transformed. Your potential extends far beyond the boundaries of what you currently believe is possible. Let me share a truth that transformed my relationship with time. Time management isn't about squeezing more tasks into your day. It's about allocating your finite hours to what truly matters. I used to pride myself on my lengthy to-do lists and ability to hustle through 18-hour days. The wake-up call came after I completed a particularly grueling project, only to realize I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly present with my family or done anything that brought me joy. That night, I did something that felt radical. I tracked how I'd spent every hour for the previous week. The results were sobering. Nearly 40% of my time went to activities that neither moved me toward my goals nor enhanced my well-being. I was simultaneously overworked and underproductive. The shift began when I started approaching time as my most valuable, non-renewable resource. Instead of asking, "Do I have time for this?" I began asking, "Is this worth my time?" This single question eliminated countless low-value activities from my schedule. I implemented a practice called time blocking, designating specific hours for important but typically neglected areas: deep work, relationship building, physical health, and personal development. What surprised me most was that by protecting time for these essential activities, my overall productivity increased while my working hours decreased. I wasn't working less. I was working with greater intention and focus, eliminating the constant task switching and distraction that had previously fragmented my attention. Perhaps the most counterintuitive lesson I've learned about time management is the importance of planning for rest and reflection. I now schedule white space into each week, blocks of unstructured time with no specific outcome required. This practice felt uncomfortable initially, even indulgent, but I've discovered that these periods of apparent non-productivity are when some of my best ideas emerge and when I reconnect with what matters most. Effective time management isn't about becoming a productivity machine. It's about intentionally designing your days to reflect your values and priorities. When you look back at the end of your life, you won't wish you'd answered more emails or scrolled through more social media feeds. You'll wish you'd been fully present for the moments and people that mattered most. In a world of information overload, strategic knowledge building has become more crucial than ever. I used to confuse information consumption with actual learning, priding myself on reading dozens of books yearly and saving countless articles I never revisited. My perspective shifted when a colleague asked me a simple question about a book I'd recently completed. "What have you implemented from it?" The uncomfortable silence that followed revealed the gap between my information intake and my applied knowledge. That evening, I cleared my shelves of unread books and committed to a new approach: learning less, but applying more. True knowledge building isn't measured by consumption, but by implementation and integration. I developed what I call the Learn, Apply, Teach method. For every new concept I study, I immediately identify one specific application in my life, then find an opportunity to teach it to someone else. Teaching forces clarity and exposes gaps in understanding that passive consumption never reveals. I remember struggling to explain a productivity concept I thought I'd mastered, only to realize I'd grasped just the surface level. That experience of being unable to clearly articulate what I thought I knew was humbling, but invaluable. It showed me that intellectual understanding without practical application creates the illusion of knowledge without its benefits. The most powerful shift in my learning journey was becoming more selective about what I chose to study. Instead of following the latest trends or accumulating random information, I began focusing on timeless principles and skills directly relevant to my goals and challenges. This meant saying no to many interesting but ultimately peripheral topics. I started treating knowledge as an investment, regularly asking, what's the potential return on investing my time in learning this? Some knowledge compounds over time, creating a foundation for future growth, while other information is fleeting or superficial. By prioritizing depth over breadth and application over accumulation, I've found that true expertise develops not from knowing many things shallowly, but from knowing few things deeply and applying them consistently. Let me share something it took me years to understand. Your financial situation is rarely just about money. It's about your relationship with money. I spent my 20s and early 30s in a cycle of scarcity and splurging, never quite getting ahead despite increasing my income. The pattern seemed mysterious until I recognized that I was carrying my family's unspoken money beliefs, that there's virtue in struggle, that wealthy people are somehow morally compromised, and that financial security is always just out of reach. These unconscious beliefs were sabotaging my efforts until I deliberately began examining and reshaping them. My transformation started with a simple practice: tracking every dollar that entered and left my life without judgment, simply observing the patterns. What I discovered was that financial health isn't about sophistication. It's about fundamentals practiced consistently. I established 4 non-negotiable habits: automatically saving a percentage of every income source before seeing the money, maintaining a dedicated emergency fund, eliminating high-interest debt before anything else, and regularly reviewing my spending to ensure it aligned with my actual values rather than momentary desires. These practices weren't revolutionary, but my consistency with them was. I stopped looking for financial shortcuts or get-rich-quick opportunities and instead focused on the unsexy but effective work of making slightly better decisions day after day. The compound effect over several years was remarkable. The most profound lesson I've learned about finances is that restriction rarely works long-term, but purposeful allocation does. Instead of creating budgets that felt punitive, I began asking myself what I truly wanted my money to do for me. This shifted my perspective from what I couldn't spend to what I was choosing to fund, whether that was future security, present experiences, or meaningful impact. I discovered that financial freedom isn't about wealth in absolute terms, but about the gap between your desires and your resources. By simultaneously increasing my earnings through skill development and moderating my consumption through greater intentionality, that gap gradually closed. Your financial situation can transform, but it requires both practical systems and personal insight into what drives your relationship with money. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of personal growth is recognizing that improvement often requires unlearning as much as learning. I spent years accumulating new strategies, techniques, and ideas without realizing that many of my existing patterns needed to be dismantled first. The breakthrough came during a period of frustration when, despite consuming countless personal development resources, my actual progress felt minimal. A mentor challenged me to create an unlearning list: habits, beliefs, and approaches that were no longer serving me but had become so familiar they felt like part of my identity. This exercise was confronting but illuminating. I realized I needed to unlearn people-pleasing, perfectionism, and the belief that constant busyness equaled importance. Personal development isn't a linear path, but a daily practice of small, deliberate improvements combined with the courage to release what no longer serves you. I established what I call micro-improvement moments, brief daily reflections where I ask, What's one small thing I can do better today than I did yesterday? These improvements aren't always noticeable to others and rarely feel dramatic, but they compound over time. One day, it might be responding more thoughtfully in a difficult conversation. Another day, it might be catching myself before falling into an old reactive pattern. The key is consistency and self-compassion, recognizing that transformation is a gradual process rather than a sudden event. The most powerful shift in my approach to personal development came from changing how I measure progress. Instead of focusing exclusively on outcomes, the promotion, the relationship, the achievement, I began valuing the development of my character and capabilities. This subtle reorientation makes growth sustainable because it's internally motivated rather than dependent on external validation. Even when external results aren't immediately visible, I can recognize and appreciate the strengthening of my patience, resilience, integrity, or compassion. True personal development isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully yourself by shedding the layers of conditioning, fear, and limiting patterns that prevent you from expressing your authentic potential. This is a lifetime journey, but one that rewards you at every step along the way. Finding purpose isn't about discovering some grand cosmic assignment. It's about creating meaning through how you engage with your life. I spent years waiting for purpose to strike like lightning, bringing perfect clarity about my reason for existing. This passive waiting created a persistent sense of incompleteness, as if my real life were on hold until my purpose revealed itself. The transformation began when I stopped searching for purpose as something to find and started approaching it as something to create through deliberate action. I remember volunteering at a community project with no particular expectations, simply showing up to be of service. The sense of fulfillment I experienced wasn't because the activity aligned with some predetermined purpose, but because I was fully engaged in something larger than myself. Purpose emerges at the intersection of your strengths, what brings you alive, and how you can contribute to others. I developed a practice of regularly asking myself 3 questions. What am I naturally good at? Zrenya, what activities create a sense of flow or timelessness when I'm engaged in them? And how might these serve something or someone beyond myself? The insights from these questions weren't always dramatic, but they provided direction for experimentation. Each small step, taking a class, volunteering, having conversations with people doing work I found intriguing, created more clarity than all my previous abstract contemplation. Purpose, I discovered, reveals itself through action and reflection, not through passive waiting or abstract analysis. The most liberating realization about purpose is that it evolves throughout your life rather than remaining static. What provides meaning in one season may shift in another as you grow and as circumstances change. This doesn't indicate failure or lack of clarity. It reflects your ongoing development as a human being. I've found that purpose becomes most powerful when it's held as a direction rather than a destination, a guiding orientation rather than a fixed endpoint. This perspective allows for both commitment and flexibility, enabling you to act decisively today while remaining open to evolution tomorrow. Your purpose isn't something that exists separately from your daily life waiting to be discovered. It's expressed and created through how you choose to live each day, how you direct your energy, and how you relate to the world around you. The final element you must work on is perhaps the most underestimated: gratitude. I used to dismiss this practice as simplistic positivity, rolling my eyes at suggestions to just be grateful amid real challenges. My perspective transformed during one of the most difficult periods of my life, when multiple setbacks occurred simultaneously. A friend challenged me to identify 3 specific things I appreciated each day, no matter how small. At first, it felt forced and superficial, but I committed to the practice. Gradually, something shifted, not in my circumstances, which remained challenging, but in my capacity to experience joy and resilience amid those circumstances. This wasn't about denying difficulties, but about refusing to let them eclipse everything else. Gratitude isn't just a sentiment. It's a practice that literally rewires your brain. I established a structured approach, each morning identifying something from my past I'm grateful for, something in my present I appreciate, and something I look forward to in the future. This expanded my awareness beyond immediate concerns and created a larger context for whatever challenges I was facing. The most profound impact emerged in my relationships as I began explicitly expressing appreciation to others, not just general thanks, but specific acknowledgement of their qualities and contributions. The dynamics transformed. Connections deepened, conflicts resolved more easily, and opportunities for collaboration expanded. What had begun as a personal coping mechanism became a powerful tool for community building. What I've discovered is that gratitude functions as both a practice and an outcome of the previous 9 elements we've discussed. As you develop a constructive attitude, communicate effectively, build self-discipline, challenge limiting beliefs, manage your time, expand your knowledge, improve your finances, commit to personal development, and clarify your purpose, gratitude emerges more naturally. Simultaneously, practicing gratitude creates a foundation that supports growth in all these areas. This virtuous cycle is available to anyone willing to begin. The circumstances of your life may contain real challenges and limitations, but your capacity to experience meaning, connection, and fulfillment within those circumstances is far greater than you've been led to believe. It starts with the simple but profound choice to acknowledge what's good, what's working, and what's possible, not despite your challenges, but alongside them.